NHL buyout season is fully upon us and the buyout window is now open. We've already seen one major buyout from the Vancouver Canucks, but today we're going to take a look at 10 other top candidates who could be victims of NHL buyouts over the next couple of weeks. We'll discuss these players coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, the NHL buyout season is officially upon us. It opens 48 hours after the Stanley Cup is awarded, so it started here in the last couple of days. So far, we've only seen one player be bought out, and that was Vancouver Canuck defenseman Oliver Ekman-Larsson. That was a very long-term, very expensive buyout, considering the amount of term and money that he had left owing on his contract. Now, we're going to take a look at 10 other candidates that I feel are pretty, for the most part, pretty strong cases here that could be bought out. They're not all going to likely happen. At least, I would say, a handful to half of these guys probably will. But I will stress one big important detail here. All of these teams, before they go down the road of a buyout, are going to definitely try to make trades. If they can trade a player and retain salary even, in most cases, it works out to be more beneficial. It just depends. Some buyouts, the way they're structured, and depending on the contract and the age of the player, sometimes it makes more sense to do a buyout. And, when they talk to teams about trades, like, for example, if a player's a restricted free agent still, like they're still under the age of 26, and it's going to be because that's a 1/3 buyout instead of a 2/3 buyout. So it makes a substantial difference. So in case you're not quite familiar with how it works, just to quickly explain, is they take the remaining money in the contract. It's a 2/3 buyout over twice the period of time. So if they had 2 years left on the contract, they're going to take 2/3 of the remaining money, spread it out over 4 years. So the cap hit gets adjusted. You do get an extra, duration added on to the cap calculation, but that's just how you have to deal with it, right? So you extend it out over more time, but you create a roster spot. You do get short-term relief, but sometimes it's long-term pain. Look at the Minnesota Wild, prime example, after doing huge buyouts, a lot of term money left on the contracts for Ryan Suter and Zach Parise, and now they're going to be in kind of cap jail, so to speak, for an extended time while they work their way through those cap penalties, basically, for doing that. So let's take a look here at the other 10 candidates I feel make excellent candidates to be buyouts over the next couple of weeks. This current buyout window closes as of June 30th, which is right before free agency gets underway on July 1st. First up, we're going to look at the Toronto Maple Leafs and goaltender Matt Murray. Now, one big question here is the health of Matt Murray. A player cannot be bought out if he is not cleared for being able to play. So if he's not healthy, no buyout can be possible. That's not fair to the player. If they're out because of injury and health purposes, then that is not allowed. But I do believe Matt Murray was able and ready to play and cleared to return to action the last few games of the Toronto Maple Leafs season when they were still in round 2 of the playoffs. So right near the end of the regular season, of course, he did have, it was a weird play, but he took an odd slip and fall after getting contact from another player on the ice. I believe it was a concussion he was diagnosed with, and he was cleared partway through the playoffs. He never got into any action, of course. For the Leafs, they continued to run with Samsonov as the goaltender and then Joseph Woll as the number 2. But Samsonov did get hurt near the end of the Florida series, and I believe Murray was there backing up. So he should be considered healthy if they want to consider doing this buyout. But like I said, like all these guys, they're going to try to trade them first. If they can figure out a way to do a trade, even with retaining some salary to make it more favorable on their cap, that will be their first option. But with most of these players, if not all, the teams are going to have to add incentives for other teams to take on their contracts. They're not going to take them on willingly. They're going to have to get additional assets, whether it be prospects, draft picks, something that entices them to want to do the deal. But buying out Matt Murray would save the Maple Leafs $5.3 million for the coming season because he only has 1 year left on that contract, but he would have an extra added year on because, like I said, it's 2/3 of the money over twice the period of time. So he's got 1 year left. It's spread it over 2. The second year would have a cap hit of $2 million. So they'd save 5.3 coming this year, which is huge. They're in win now mode. Of course, the cap will increase more next year. They'd have some dead money there, $2 million, which kind of sucks in a way, but it is going to be a bigger increase in the cap next year, which they'll have to factor in to all this. But if they can figure out a way to retain some money on Matt Murray and ship him off to another team with a another asset or something, that would be preferable. Now, of course, the Ottawa Senators had retained a little bit of his money as well when they completed that deal with the Maple Leafs last offseason. So, of course, if he is bought out, that would affect the amount that their cap is impacted by the retention as well. Obviously, they would end up saving some money, just like the Maple Leafs would. Next up will be the New York Islanders, a long-time player, Josh Bailey. Bailey's been a good soldier for them. He's worn letters and assistant captain for a long time. Good human being, real good soldier for them. But it's kind of been to the point for a little while now, and we're at a definite point, in my opinion, where it's time. He needs to move on. The Islanders cannot afford to have another passenger making this kind of money when they need to find ways to score more goals and make some adjustments if they're going to have any chance on continuing to be a playoff team and having a shot to win a playoff series. He's making $5 million, and he's only got 1 year left. So again, they'll talk to teams with cap space, like the Chicago Blackhawks are a prime example. If they were willing to attach a draft pick or a prospect, maybe the Blackhawks take him on, and maybe they take on the full hit perhaps because they have tons of space. So that's a possibility. But if they have to go down the road of a buyout, a Josh Bailey buyout saves the Islanders $2.3 million this year and adds on an additional year of 1.16. So it's not as big of a savings as some. Of course, all these contracts are structured differently between signing bonuses. The salaries are different year to year, and that all makes a difference into how it impacts the salary cap based on the timing of each buyout. But a Josh Bailey buyout, in my opinion, will be a possibility if they cannot find a deal. But I think Lou will find a way to ship him out if it's to Chicago, Arizona, or another team that has space who can take on a veteran player and give him a roster spot. Next up, we get the Montreal Canadiens, a veteran, Mike Hoffman. He's down to 1 year in his contract as well, and he's currently scheduled to have a cap hit next year of $4.5 million. Hoffman has not lived up to the contract of Montreal. They have a lot of veterans there that they're looking to move out, and it's been reported that last year, the second half of the season, approaching the deadline, and so far this offseason, they've been trying to find teams to take on some of these contracts. We're looking at guys like Mike Hoffman. You're looking at like Yoel Armia, another one. I know Jonathan Drouin is now a free agent, but leading to the deadline, he was another one. Just trying to see if they can find teams to take them off their hands, and there's not much, no bites out there. Nothing happening. So Hoffman and his 1 year of $4.5 million. If they buy him out, they would save $3.3 million. So that's a pretty big, substantial savings. They get 3.3 of the $4.5 million back. They'd add an extra year on of his contract being under a cap at $1.6 million next year. So that kind of sucks, but at the same time, as they move out some of these veterans, they're going to have more guys on the ELCs. They should be able to do some juggling here with their cap situation, and that could be a big savings for them this year because they're not in a great cap situation for a team that's, rebuilding and going through the stages that they're currently facing here. Next up, we have a younger player, Edmonton Oilers forward, Kailer Yamamoto. Now, Yamamoto is a player who I think Oilers management and teammates really like. He's a player with a lot of potential, but he's not lived up to it on a consistent basis. They're facing a cap crunch that they need to figure out a way to win with Leon and Connor in their prime years. This is at the end of the day a business. They have to make some tough decisions, and a couple of these younger forwards are going to have to probably go. And Yamamoto is a prime example. Now, he's still young. He's under the age of 26. He's still in the RFA category. So this would not be a 2/3 buyout. It would be a bigger savings than some. We're looking at, a 1/3 buyout. He's only got 1 year left at $3.1 million. So they'd have a huge savings next year. Out of that $3.1 million, they'd get back $2.6 million. And the money, I believe the year after, might even have a cap credit, I believe is how that would work. Because there would be such a cheap buyout for them. So they would have a huge savings next year. I know that a Yamamoto trade is something that's been rumored and expected. If they can retain a little bit of money, then it's obviously worth them trading him. But at this point, looking at what a buyout does, they save 2.6. So that's just over $500,000 that they would have as a cap hit. So it doesn't make any sense for them to retain any more money than that. So look for them to either try to trade with a $500K retention if need be, or having something attached to it, or they'll go down this road. Next up, I want to take a look at another longer-term contract, not quite to the extent of Allred and Larson in Vancouver, but still more substantial than most of these so far. and that's Flyers center Kevin Hayes. Now, I do think a Kevin Hayes trade is quite possible. There was a lot of rumors last year linking him to the Columbus Blue Jackets. However, the Blue Jackets seem to have gone in a different direction. I know there was reports at the deadline that it was pretty much a done deal that this offseason that Philly was going to trade Hayes to Columbus with, I'm not sure, it wasn't going to be 50%, but probably 30 to 40% salary retention, and that he would go to Columbus, reunited with his former college line mate, Johnny Gaudreau. It's well documented that the relationship between him and John Tortorella, the head coach, is fractured. He's not going to be what Tortorella wants on that roster and in that lineup, and many in the organization feel that they need to move on from Hayes. I mean, really, if you look at the production he put up last year and look at the contract when he signed it, it's really not that terrible of a deal. I mean, yes, he's getting a little bit older. He's never been a great skater, so there is some concerns over that. But at the same time, Hayes actually did a decent job for the Flyers last year. I'll give him credit on that front. And if team can get him with some salary retained and get him down around, $4.5 to $5 million, that's suddenly not so bad. He's got 3 years left. But if they can't figure anything out, they do have an all else fails a buyout option here. They would save $4.88 million next year. And then for the next 2 years after that, they'd save $2.38 million. But then they'd have 3 additional years tacked on at $1.61. So it's not ideal. And I think out of all these players that we're talking about, the Hayes buyout might be a little less likely than some of them. But it just seems like the Flyers are pretty much adamant on moving on from Hayes one way or another. And with the Jackets not really being in the mix now, you got to wonder what the options are going to be for a trade. It might not be as much as they thought. Now, to be honest, if the Boston Bruins end up in a situation where Bergeron and Krejci do not return, if they both retire, might make sense to send him home to his hometown Bruins. I know he'd probably be happy with that himself. But again, they'd have to be creative to make the money work. I'm not sure exactly how, because the Bruins are tight. And obviously, they have a big overage from bonuses last year from the Bergeron and Krejci contracts as well. Going to be challenging, but that would be a team I would look to if Columbus is not going to be in the mix. And like I said, this is a fallback option if nothing else works. The Dallas Stars is the next team we're going to look to, in defenseman Ryan Suter. Obviously, Ryan Suter's having a big impact on the Minnesota Wild right now. He could possibly be bought out for the second time. Now, I've seen some Dallas Stars reporters say they don't feel that the odds of this happening are very high. I know as the season ended for the Dallas Stars in the playoffs, there was a lot of people talking about how this was a real possibility because Ryan Suter, in all fairness, didn't really have a great playoff run. You could tell he looked lost a few times, certainly slowing down. And, the 4-year contract, as soon as he signed that, I was really worried about the term. I knew that leaving Minnesota, signing for a lower cap hit, like, okay, he's still playing pretty good minutes. Maybe not living up to that contract, but he's not a terrible player. If you get him into a smaller role, maybe a second pair D, $3-4 million, I think he can still live up to that for a while. And he has, but he signed a 4-year deal. He's, already halfway through that, and now we're starting to see that decline. Now, like I said, we could see a scenario where Dallas maybe doesn't do this just yet. They try to get through another season, maybe try to play him in a more of a reduced role. They can get him maybe be more of a third pair defenseman next year, maybe adjust things if they can, and then maybe consider it for the final year if it's not working out. But if they did go down this road, they would save $2.86 million for the next 2 years. So his cap hit's $365, they'd save $286. So that's pretty substantial. But then they'd have 2 additional years tacked on at 1.4. So that would hurt in years 3 and 4 into the future. Pittsburgh, I want to look to a forward in Mikael Granlund. Of course, was a very confusing deadline pickup by GM Ron Hextall, who of course is no longer with the team. New GM Kyle Dubas, well, I guess his technical title is president, but he's basically the GM as well. Probably wouldn't be a deal we'd see him do. And it could be a case where he has to buy out a player to, undo something from the old regime here. Granlund's making making $5 million for the next 2 years. Now they would have big savings. They're in a tight cap situation. They're still trying to be in win now mode with Crosby, Letang, Malkin, and that's going to be the task here of Kyle Dubas, is to get them back to being a playoff and cup contender, which is not going to be easy. They have a lot of open spots on the roster, including goaltending. They need all the cap space they can get. Obviously, Crosby, Malkin, Letang, they're still good players, but another year older since last year. They missed the playoffs the last year for the first time in a long, long time. And, they need to do what they can. So buying out Granlund would save them $4.1 million for the upcoming year, save them $3.1 million a year after, but then they'd have 2 additional years tacked on at 1.8. So the next 2 years would be a big help. Years 3 and 4 down the road would kind of suck to have that dead money there. But if you're looking at year 2, we're looking at probably seeing a $4 or $5 million cap increase. And then years 3 and 4 down the road, I would hope you could see a $2 to $3 million increase per year. So you might get enough increases that it might average it out, but that's going to be a little bit tougher to project than it could have been, pre-COVID. But we'll see where that goes. Another real serious candidate here for a buyout is Bruins defenseman Mike Riley, who spent the bulk of the last year in the minors. He's got 1 year left on his contract at $3 million. And if they buy him out, they'd save $2.66. So it's a huge savings for next season, which could be absolutely, very, very helpful here, especially, like I said, if they need to make some other adjustments. But if they can trade Riley, it'd be even better to get the whole $3 million off the books. If the buyout would get rid of 2.66, but they would have an extra year tacked on a 1.3. So it's not substantial the year after, but it would be really helpful for next year. And at this point, I think they're taking things 1 year at a time, trying to see if they can stay in contention after a historical season. But as much as this past year was amazing in the regular season, not so good in the playoffs, they have a lot of questions facing them, and it's going to be tough to say how they proceed for next year. Lots of questions there in Boston. In San Jose, we have a couple of different candidates, but I think the main one would be Kevin Labanc. I don't think we're going to see a Marc-Edouard Vlasic buyout just yet. There's still too much time left on that one. I know there's some speculation over players like Radim Simic or Oscar Lindblom, and maybe we'll see stuff like that, but to me, their salaries are even less than Labanc. I'm not sure that it really has that much of an effect that they really need to go down that road to have dead money beyond next year. But Labanc has 1 year left at 4.725. They would save $3.9 million next year. And of course, there's always the possibility they might figure out an Erik Karlsson trade. So they could maybe get more. But if they're going to possibly have to retain money on Karlsson, they may or may not want to go down the road of a buyout. But I know Labanc is a player they're definitely actively trying to trade. If they can retain a little bit of that money and do that instead, it would be better for them. But if they're going to save 3.9, then that's probably the number you're looking at for them to maybe retain and bump it down to. If they can get it down to 3.9 and then trade them, then they don't have that second year of dead money, it would be better. That's what they're likely going to try to do for a strategy here. The second year would have a hit of 1.95, which is not really ideal. But again, for a team that's kind of rebuilding and trying to create some flexibility, it might not be as big a deal for them as it would be for some teams. And lastly, we're going to look at the Washington Capitals and forward Anthony Mantha. Now, Mantha's another player that's been heavily mentioned in trade talk. The Capitals would definitely like to move on and move that contract off the books. And we'll see if they can figure out a way to do that via trade instead. But he is making $5.7 million next year. If they have to go down the road of a buyout, they would save $4.3 million for the coming year. And then they'd have a dead money the year after at 2.16. So obviously this team needs all the cap space they can get. They're trying to get back into win now contention. I know they're trying to make some changes there to get back and hopefully help Ovechkin be on a competitive team for the last few years of his career, just like the Penguins are trying to do. See if they can salvage the glory days here just a little bit, and every little bit of salary cap space that they can use to go after better players is going to be that much more helpful. But either way, I don't expect Mantha to be in Washington next year. If they can't find a trade, again, it shows you by the buyout calculator here, they're going to save 4.3 in a buyout. They're probably not going to retain any more money to knock it down lower on a trade. If they can do that, it would be preferable. But again, you have to analyze the second year impact, right? Dead money of $2 million in 2 years from now. Not really what you want to do, but sometimes you have no choice but to move these bad contracts off the books. GMs are all guilty of making mistakes, especially on July 1st or whenever free agency starts, because obviously the last few years have been a little bit of a different hockey calendar. We're finally back to normal with free agency getting back to being here on July 1 of this year. So let me know your thoughts on these buyout candidates, or if there's any others throughout the league you feel are a high probability of being bought out here. The window's open now. We could see some more activity this week, and it closes as of June the 30th, so they can become free agents on July 1st. Teams, of course, can get a second buyout window If they have RFA cases go to arbitration, then they can get a second buyout window once all their RFA business is completed. So that will come later on into the summer, into July, and sometimes into August, depending on how long things take to be completely settled. So let me know your thoughts on these and what other ones you think are possible in the comments. We'll talk about it further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.